And the usual warning, we're now recording, so you are being recorded. Okay, double checking that one, I'm actually projecting slides, and yes. Two, that I'm actually recording this, yes. And that we have the support of Emmy very kindly to admit people as they come in, because I won't be able to see them. Fantastic. I think check. We're getting good at this. By the end of the course, I think I will be the master of Teams. Not that it was a skill I wanted to acquire. The usual interview when you're at a different stage in life, they said, which skills would you like to acquire? Teams was not one of those, but well, life. This lecture is much shorter than the other ones, on purpose, because I know we're running out of time. Oh, by the way, anyone on behind the screen, I won't be able to see you. And there's the whole room on your left. So if you want to move from there to there, I know that the window is a little bit better in terms of fresh air, but your choice. I can move a little bit to the left, but that's as far as the cable of the keyboard goes. I hope you can hear me properly with this mic. Yeah, in the room. I, of course, can hear myself. Good. As I said, this lecture is much shorter than the other ones, partly because it's more as a sort of appendix to some of the things we have covered. It would be in other contexts. I think we have to close the windows, because otherwise the noise in this room is deafening. So we are back to the boiling situation as in the past. But while very kindly, some of members of our team, LDS, they're taking care of the windows. Which are not terribly intuitive. Thank you. I think everybody starts getting the idea that how many people does it take to give a lecture in Bologna? Several. One speaking, one checking Teams, the other windows, a group at the cooling system. And for those of you who are online and cannot see what's going on, we have two members of the team managing one of the windows. They're very old windows. They're rather complicated. They're enormous. So at some point, you need to find the perfect balance. Almost there, 2 out of 3. The third is going, a quick consultation, maybe not. Yes, perhaps. And we have a winner. Yes. All on record. And the third window is going 3, 2, 1, almost. And for anyone who just couldn't breathe for the suspense, yes, we have the windows closed. And we're back in the boiling room. So 1, 2, 3, immersion. We will be sweating here for a couple of hours. So lecture 5 is going to be much shorter. In a different world where we would have much more time, this would be an interface to a parallel set of lectures on the politics of information. You will see why. Not being in that parallel world, we will start and stop this particular sort of ramification of the lectures in question. And I hope that that will be something those of you around the world will be able to join me next year when that will be the topic. After this lecture, We will cover the digital utopia topic. I don't think there will be time for the semantic capital lecture, which again will be postponed to next June. Usual quick map of what we're going to cover. The point that I want to explore is this idea of complexity. We have seen it in the past lectures. It is quite common to talk about an increased complexity in our society. It is a word that gives a false sense of precision or science or clarity. Often, whenever people talk about complexity, be aware they're just bypassing precisely what they talk about in order not to engage with the complex nature of the topic. They just hand wave complexity or sometimes super complexity. I have heard people talk about hyper complexity. Now, just make it complexity plus complexity, whatever, doesn't help to understand the subject that we discuss. Remember, system, model, all that sort of is still in the background. So what we want to do in this lecture is to understand, one, what complexity means or complexities, because in fact we have several scientific concepts of complexity. We will do that in an entirely sort of soft and qualitative way, even if complexity, all the kinds that are worth discussing in a serious context, are quantitative and very seriously quantitative. The theory of complexity in mathematical logic / computation is where you can actually determine whether some problems can or cannot be tackled, solved, processed in whatever resources you have, time, space, etc., etc. So imagine you are in a pharmaceutical context and you need to discuss the folding of proteins. Folding of proteins until recently it is a complex, to be specified in a long while. It is a complex problem. Above all, it is a problem that until recently required human skills. Lots of people, lots of time, and a lot of abilities. Recently, Google will help. The usual AlphaGo something, because its patents managed to do that in a sort of entirely or largely AI-based approach. It's a major breakthrough, not least because how you fold the protein will tell you what elements are active in a potential solution for some kind of treatment. So at the basis of all pharmaceutical research, there is no protein folding kind of problems. You can imagine how that is going to be completely changed and is a recent innovation. So their context is, as I said, hugely quantitative. It is crucial to be able to predict whether, for example, a problem such as protein folding is computable or not, can be treated by whatever computation system you have or not, is something that we're going to see here. But what I'm more interested in, this background, the 3C, I introduced them yesterday, ways in which agents can work together. They can coordinate the efforts. Need to be careful because they are in order. They can coordinate, they can collaborate, or they can cooperate. The three things mean something different. We will cover that. The 3C are ways in which we move from a competitive society in which there is a lot of winner takes all or zero-sum games. A typical zero-sum game is a game in which someone must win tennis. You cannot draw at tennis. Someone has to get out of that tennis court as a winner. You can draw chess. So But a real winner takes all zero sum is some game or an interaction where if someone wins, the other one loses, and they can also both get out with something equally good. Then we will look at a paradox behind this hypothetical society in which more of the 3C should be implemented in order to solve problems that require the 3C. All this to be clarified in a little while, and why governance and the future of governance is the solution, and what kind of people will need in order to do the governance, etc., to solve the problems. So they didn't call us. But let me start with a bit of a super simple example of what complexity looks like. I hope this works. Yes. So these are cellular automata. These are 3D, this simple stuff. You can find tons of this on YouTube. Consider that this even beautiful system is generated, all this, by incredibly elementary rules. I don't remember the particular rules in this case, but it could be, for example, if you are 2 squares next to the next cell, change color into blue. If your neighbor becomes blue, then everybody, 1 cell from the neighbor blue becomes red. Elementary. I mean, nothing complex, something that you can write in simple lines of code. And that is the sort of already, let me show you again, the sort of complexity that looks to us. Now, this is a false complexity. For anyone who understands complexity, this is not complex because it's deterministic. You got the rules, and by looking at the code, so to speak, or the rules of the game, you know exactly what is going to happen. A little bit like tic-tac-toe for the people who haven't played that at school. I won't ruin the game for you, but double check. It's not worth playing. But no, for those of you, enjoy that. In translation into Italian, the circle and crosses on the grid, that's the called tic-tac-toe. Where also that is not complex in any way. Simple rules, you know what's going to happen, etc. So complexity starts arising, and I'll tell you more about the actual stuff. Not when you have deterministic rules that tell you exactly what must happen if something else happens, but when you have other interactions that start changing in a way that becomes a little bit unpredictable where the system is going. There are, of course, deterministic systems that are so full of rules. Remember that for us, epistemologically, we have no idea of saying how they're going to behave. But then again, there's the distinction between what the system as we model it is in our description and our capacities to predict what the model might actually turn out to be. In order to understand a little bit of complexity, we need those this little bit of vocabulary. The vocabulary changes from discipline to discipline, so this is just a way of being on the same page. Trust me, everybody uses terms in a different way, so feel free. But given a space, could be physical, it could be just logical. In other words, a context within which you are observing actions. Tennis court and the 2 planes, that is your space, physical. Chess, the board and the pieces and the rules, that is your logical space. It doesn't matter whether it's big, small, black and white, or red and blue, or the pieces are like old medieval little statuette or Second World War of soldiers. That is irrelevant. It's a logical space. That's why you can play chess at any dimension. It doesn't become more or less difficult, contrary to tennis, of course. So whether it's a physical space like tennis or a logical space like chess, in that given space, you need to have those things in order to start talking about complexity. You need to have some elements of the So we call it space, some properties of those elements, something happens, so the elements do something, the actions, and you need the transitions. In other words, the system moves through stages, and imagine like a chess game. First move, second move, third move. You can take snapshots of the chessboard and see how the transition happens. Now, within this particular sort of description, the kind of complexity that we have, of course, concerns the system we are observing and its space of observation. Let me remind you about the two garden systems to observe what was happening in the garden. Remember the cat moving, the branch of the tree moving, the stone not moving. I hope you remember. It was only a few weeks ago. So, well, that is our space, and the agents have properties at the elements of the system. They have actions. So it concerns that system, the components, the cat, the branch, or the pieces on the chessboard, the two players for the tennis, their relations, and the process state spaces, which is another way of talking about state transitions. What kind of movement, quote unquote, can describe the system evolution from A to B to C to D, etc. Now, sometimes, if you remember again from past lectures, the system is so elementary that the process state space is on, off. You go outside, you go to the supermarket, the door opens and it closes. It opens and it closes. And that's all it does. You get action, you get state transition, you have the elements, you have properties of the elements. The process state space is as elementary as it can possibly be. It also doesn't have any memory. No, it does remember what happened just a moment before. So in terms of, for those of you who have done Markov chain, whether the system does or does not have memory of what happened, and on the basis of the memory acts differently in the future, well, that is crucial. Let me give you an example. If you walk into a room and you look at a chessboard, you can start playing right there. There's no need to know how did you get to that particular configuration of the chessboard. The history is irrelevant. Every state of the system is zero memory. I hope this is clear. I don't need to know how you got there to start calculating what's the best next move. It doesn't matter. In a poker game, it's probably important to remember the kind of card you played before, the kind of attitude that the guy has or the other person has. And if you don't know what has happened, you can't simply walk in and start playing the best. So there is need for memory. So whether systems have a memory on which they can perform or zero memory, there is already two different worlds of computation. Markov chain, yes, Markov chain, no, etc. But that's not for us. It's important, however, to have that concept in mind in order to have a bit of more granularity when you look at the world. Okay, so there are some adaptive complex systems. The one that you saw before with the cell automaton, the game of life, normally is played on 2D, but I'll show you the 3D, doesn't matter. It's not really adaptive in a way in which the agents modify their actions depending on what the other agents are doing flexibly. Remember, that is, we might like to use it to look at a Darwinian context, for example. Imagine you have that little 3D space with all those cells moving around, etc. And some are predators, some are preys. So if a predator meets a prey, eats the prey. If the prey sees a predator, runs away. As simple as that. Click and you're probably going to reach a balance with enough predators feeding on prey and enough prey not being able to run away. So if that is what we have in mind, that is a not so much as an adaptive, but an evolutionary system with very, as I told you, just two rules, for example, run or eat kind of system. Some people would like to treat that as adaptive, and so be it. It doesn't matter. What is important is that the truly adaptive complex systems we describe in a moment is the kind of thing that you find on a motorway. On a motorway, every driver is constantly adapting, if it's busy day driving, to what the other people are doing. The adaptive nature of that behavior is not deterministic. That's why I'm using the motorway and people who actually may decide to speed up and be dangerous. There might be someone who wants to commit suicide. You can't consider that a deterministic system where, given the rules, for example, of how you should drive on a motorway, this will follow. Now, this is crucial because if you start thinking in terms of driverless cars, anyone who is crazy enough to think that all it takes is to implement in the software how you should be driving on a motorway, job done, has no idea about what we're talking. Because on that motorway, there will be adaptive complex systems called humans who might have a heart attack suddenly and will go out of the way. So we need to be much more careful in distinguishing evolutionary, adaptive, deterministic, non-deterministic. And now we're talking about the actual theories of complexity. All this can be described at different levels of abstraction. So you have that little system there with enough elements, enough properties of those elements. Imagine things and qualities, properties of things, or if you are more linguistically minded, nouns or individual names and adjectives. So you have chairs, and chairs described as brown, four-legged, etc. So elements, properties of elements, interactions between elements, plus a way of describing, whether deterministically or not, according to what sort of rules they seem to be interacting. For example, these chairs, they seem to be interacting in a way that is pretty zero. But imagine we look at this room from the level of abstraction. This is a little exercise so that you unhinge your intuitions. Imagine there is a camera here looking at the chairs in this room. All that camera can perceive is points. Every point is a chair. The camera does not see human beings, does not see anybody. All that it can possibly perceive is position of chair. Have a, say, 1 month movie made like 3 minutes around their movie. You will see the chairs moving as points on the screen. If all you know about what you see is, look, some chairs, actually, I don't even know they are chairs, so some points are coming together. There's always some points that are always together. They never actually move on the screen, and they're always joined. So you could start describing their system at some point as free chairs or free points and fixed points. And the fixed points never go anywhere. The number of points is always the same, but sometimes there are points that disappear and reappear. They're just looking at the video. Someone took the chair out and in. Now, that is the way in which we need to start thinking to understand level abstraction, etc., etc. So as far as that sort of level abstraction is concerned, you could be looking at bicycles in Oxford. They move, some move often together, they stay, they disappear, a lot of them do, no, stolen, 3 in my case, stolen, oh, 3 decades, so that's a good average. Step out and someone asks, are you looking at 1 month recording of chairs in the room, etc., in Bologna, or are you looking at 1 month recording, etc., of bicycles in Oxford? I mean, if the level of abstraction is points moving on a screen, you don't know, and you can't tell. The poverty limited nature of the information you get at the level of abstraction is such that it could be satisfied by almost any system. That's why we need to increase or change the level of abstraction. I need more or different kind of data. Now, back to us, that was just refreshing your mind and helping you to think differently with respect to the world. Next time you take a cappuccino. Imagine that the system we're looking at now is, whatever the description there, is analyzed at different levels of complexity. Remember, these are not hierarchical. It's not that one is higher or lower. They're just different ways of approaching the system from a level of abstraction that we decide is interesting. One is, and it's a super classic, is called Kolmogorov complexity. Wikipedia has wonderful entries on all four, so I won't spend too much time there. How, let me use a different word, inappropriately, how difficult is it to create this thing? What does it take to put together, for example, that here? So the Kolmogorov complexity is not something, it's not so much about the system, but what it takes to generate that particular system. I'll tell you a little bit more about the other complexities, and then we go one more round, so the comparison will help. Often, people, when they talk about complexity, they have in mind the state of the system, how complex as it is set. So forget how you actually generate that system. Once you have it there, how many moving pieces, no, you heard that sentence, are there? Oh, look, this is a very complex political problem, because the parties have different interests. The legislation is pulling one way, there is pressure, say, from a particular conflict. So lots of elements that are coming together and they are trying to find a balance. That is the state complexity of the system. Hasn't got anything to do with how you get there. Of course, the whole things are related, but it's not what we're focusing on. So we're not focusing on the process that led to that state of affair, but we are looking at, given, for example, a watch, how all the pieces are interacting with each other. What's the complexity of that particular watch? I hope this is kind of okay. A bit more. Together with the state, you have something, again, called programming complexity. I like to distinguish the two. Often the two are put together because one is static. So imagine looking at slightly complicated watch and all the pieces, how they are placed with respect to each other and how they are supposed to interact with respect to each other. The other one looks actually at the dynamics through time. How, for example, one piece working with another gets less and less efficient. I'm inventing on the spot. Or, for example, how the two parties, say American context, are through time becoming more and more confrontation or less and less. So the complexity of the mechanism in this case becomes the complexity of the dynamic of the system we're talking about. The last one, which is something we have already met, is computational complexity. It is the queen of complexities, together with Kolmogorov, but I think Kolmogorov is more of a princess. Pass me the analogy. But the real queen, if someone is scientifically talking about complexity and doesn't tell you which complexity they are talking about, they almost certainly mean computational complexity. And it is, as you remember, what does it take to solve that problem? So how complex it is for S to solve problem P. Remember the diet of the animal? No, and how we were also having a taxonomy of animals depending on what they eat and how much they eat. Well, that quote-unquote complexity is the computational complexity. If it takes longer than the age of the universe to solve that problem, the problem, it doesn't matter. That is logically speaking solvable. It is practically unfeasible. The complexity is too high. Back to chromograph, how complex it is to generate S. Imagine that S is something like 10 times. So I write on the board 10 times number 2. How complex is that string? Not very much. Imagine I write that 100 times. Right, 100 times on the blackboard, number 2. You could get that by simply saying write 100 times 2, which in terms of letters is much shorter than write 200 times. That's what we do all the time by compressing files. You zip them, whatever the word you want to use, but something that is a system has a certain amount of complexity that can be shrunk. If you need to write 1,000,000 times 2, that could take a huge amount of time, unless you have a little mind saying, write 1,000,000 times 2. That's it. That piece of code, so to speak, will enable you to have the equivalent of 1,000,000 times 2 on the blackboard. Of course, life is not normally that boring, but if you take a picture, and most of the picture is a blue sky, that is 1,000,000,000 pixels, all blue or of the same kind. All you need to tell the software is, don't have 1,000,000 pixels, just send one thing like this 1,000,000 times. That's why their file is much, much shorter, much smaller. So the instructions get shorter, the file, the amount of memory required shrinks. The compression of the complexity is what you start talking in terms of chromograph idea of the complexity of the system we're talking about. Now, sometimes people play with the idea and they start telling you, oh, what's the minimum amount of, say, complexity required? So that, almost like Nescafe, if I add water, you get rubbish coffee, but you get a lot of coffee. So you get a zip file and click, and whoop, you get a lot of the whole picture. Now, if you have text, for example, you must have noticed that a file that is made of text usually is more shrinkable than something that contains difficult pictures. Well, because the repetition is the thing that you can simply say, do this X number of times. I'm oversimplifying at a level that is disgusting, but it should be okay for anyone listening to this, okay? I know, I'm ashamed. Well, the shrinking is much more feasible than with pictures. Of all these 4, therefore, the top 2, the chromograph, now, what does it take to generate S, and what does it take to S to solve a problem, are the real ways in which we normally talk about complexity. Static programming, important, but you may not meet them regularly. These 4, and I told you, each of them has a nice Wikipedia entry. Please go and be disturbed by how mathematically complex or difficult, rather, can become. It's what we need to have in the background to understand another kind of complexity, which is a little bit of has a family resemblance to some of this, but it's not quite the same. It is, someone asked, I think did, yes, there were other problems that we need to deal with, etc. Well, I would like to have a much better sense of what we mean when we talk about what I'm going to call coordination complexity. I haven't developed this idea as much, so all I'm going to tell you is all I know about it. And by the time I told you, you know as much as I do in terms of this particular kind of complexity that, as far as I know, we haven't studied yet. But it seems quite important. Now, the key sentence there is, as far as I know. For anyone online, anyone here, if you find that somewhere, someone, normally a Russian, has done an amazing amount of work on this, please tell me, because I would like not to reinvent the wheel. But in case we need to invent that particular wheel, this, I think, is the way we should be doing it. Let me go back here. So we know how much or what it takes to generate the system, then complexity, the productive or the generation complexity of their system, and it might take much less than the actual system to generate their system. We know the state complexity, the dynamic complexity, and the sort of complexity required to describe how much or what resources it takes to solve a problem. So what kind of systems we have to solve that problem. A sort of cousin of computational complexity is the following. And I use the analogy that I introduced yesterday. We have the car and the car is not starting. We need to push the car. How many people does it take to push the car and make it start, jump start? Well, imagine 4 pushing and 1 driving. So the complexity of that problem in terms of coordination is 4. 4 people are necessarily insufficient to push the car plus 1. So if you want to include the driver, complexity, coordination there, 5. It takes 5 people to put that car in motion. Now, this is different from the sufficiently different from the computational complexity to deserve a different name, I believe, but this is tentative. So there might be ways, which I haven't explored yet, to reduce this to computational complexity. That's for another day. Let's assume for a moment that this is really a different kind or a new kind of complexity. We need to step back, understand the 3C, and then come back to this particular point and see why we are in trouble. Because if that complexity is what we need, we're not getting it. So these are the 3C that I introduced just half an hour ago, roughly. I think cooking is a good way of presenting them. So imagine that, and Emmy will not mind, Emmy and I really say we're 2 undergraduates back in at Warwick. Yes. And we share the same kitchen. We cooperate if Emmy and I, and trust me, anyone who has been in a dorm, this is real life. You eat whatever you eat, as long as you don't sort of step on the toes of the other person. So if I cook, you don't cook. If I am using the fridge, you're not using it. So we cooperate, we coordinate our moves to make sure that you do whatever you want to do. I do whatever I want to do. I cook and I eat. You cook and I eat. We're definitely not friends, clearly. And we do not represent a problem for each other. This is what happens on a motorway. Remember the adaptive system? Everybody goes their own way, but they coordinate well enough to make sure that they are not a problem for the other person. If I need to go out, I signal. If I need to speed up, I move slow, etc., etc. So I coordinate my actions with your actions. That is the minimum required to make sure that things don't go bananas. I mean, that we don't really represent a problem for each other. If we both want to cook at the same time, that is not going to work. If we both want to not get on the same lane, etc., on a motorway, etc., etc. So the minimum for any complex system to work is coordination. Zero coordination, and you just have a chaotic system where things get destroyed by each other internally. The coordination is also typical of any competitive market. It seems to be a bit strange to talk about coordination in a competitive market, but no, competition is also a way of coordinating actions. It's an aggressive, adversarial way of coordinating. You just have to drive past midnight, I'm told, in Bologna, to know exactly how people drive here, right? Exactly. So no rules, and it's a competitive, adversarial coordination to make sure that you don't kill each other, but you still get on top faster, etc. Unfortunately, that is as far as a competitive market can go in terms of coordination. And we think sometimes that coordination is all it takes, but we actually have much more than coordination. You need to have sometimes collaboration or cooperation. How? We go back to Warwick and the kitchen, and Emmy and I are, at this point, collaborating. meaning that I might cook, say, one dish and she cooks another. Or I provide this, she provides the drinks and I provide the food. We split, divide, and each agent takes care of part of the process. Now, as you may imagine, that can, certainly for the two of us in the kitchen, be much more efficient than a mere coordination. My food, my milk, I still remember that when I was at Warwick, etc. You had to write on every item in that fridge, Luke. And that's how I would know. Channel was too long, and so it became Luke with a K. And this was Luke milk, Luke this, and Luke that. But otherwise, people would steal everything. Or I didn't know. Well, that's a big name, now pen written. That is the coordination that you find in a competitive society where cutthroats, but I win, you lose. And if you win, I lose. Winner takes all, etc., etc. For a collaborative enterprise, what you need coordination. For example, if we are not coordinated, we might cook the same dish, which is not a good idea, or bring just say wine and nothing else. So a bit of coordination is required, but collaboration is much more than coordination. It's also, as I said, putting together pieces for a larger project. Is there more? Well, there is cooperation. The cooperation is not just process, divide, and each, say, team takes care of part of the project. Each, say, writer writes one part of the article, and then we put together, for example, a collaborative enterprise would be a handbook where a number of authors write different chapters, and there's an editor that coordinates the effort. Brilliant, but not yet a cooperation. A cooperation is one step above the coordination and collaboration, is when we do everything together. So we decide about the recipe, we do the shopping together, we cook together, we eat together, and if it's rubbish, it's our fault, share. Simple. The sharing of the fault is important in a democracy, because if you live in a cooperative democracy, at the end of the process, there won't be people who need to be blamed, whatever they are. The people who are not us, they are the problem. They come from a different place. They don't speak our language. They have a different religion. They are not sharing our values. Their gender is not ours. Well, that is not a cooperation context. If something goes wrong in a cooperative context, we all share the blame, as well as, if everything goes well, we are all happy. As we escalate from coordination, collaboration, and cooperation, you can tell that there's more and more one needed of what comes before, but we can tackle bigger problems. And that goes back to the car. The car is not just a case of coordination, of course, 1, 2, 3, push. There's also a matter of collaboration. Someone drives and the other 4 are pushing. So there are 2 tasks. We need to collaborate. And normally the guy said, "No, look, the handbrake, don't pull the handbrake, silly. No, we're pushing." That's coordination and cooperation. But there's also cooperation, as in we do the whole thing together, because of course we have a bigger goal than just me, my car, I push, I go home, end of story. Now, once you get this 3C in view, you start seeing also, I hope, the counterpart, which is the higher the degree of C achieved, coordination, collaboration, cooperation, the more ambitious you can be in the kind of problems you can actually solve. Or to put it in less sort of enthusiastic and positive terms, the less desperate you become in terms of we're never going to solve this unless we do it all together at the same time, like climate change. Climate change is not a matter of coordination only. If it's just a matter of coordination, everybody will make sure that they do their own business and make sure that they don't bump into each other on the motorway. We need collaboration. Look, you have a really big forest in Brazil. It's a lovely place. Why don't you take care of the Amazonian? Meanwhile, we in Europe who don't have that kind of green, etc., lower, say, no, carbon impact, etc. Meanwhile, someone, say, in the United States who has money to waste and provide with a little bit of this kind of monopoly game, or even better, cooperation. We do all this being we the people, if you remember the American Constitution beginning. Now, with a we the people attitude, then the coordination complexity, and I use coordination because the minimum required, but of course includes all three C, becomes the real challenge that we have today. It is useless to have one more meeting in Paris with big flags, etc., if, for example, the new Trump will not join. Because if America is not on board, whatever we do is going to be a disaster. If China doesn't not join, there is no solution to climate change, no matter how much we spend. So, coordination complexity is the answer to how many agents does it take to solve a problem. This actually is an Oxford joke. The Oxford joke is the following. How many dons, meaning professors, the terminology there, how many dons does it take to change a bulb? And the proper answer is, I have to do it on change. That's the only answer. There is no answer. You never change. Change is not in the diary, in the dynamic, in the agenda, in the vocabulary. And in this case, it takes two, of course. Now, this is a bit of a joke, just to quantify the idea of normally. There's also a bad joke about changing bulbs, about Italian carabinieri, which is one holds the bulb and the 25 rotate the room. But that's another thing. And the bad jokes about ourselves keep going. But changing bulb normally takes only one person. So it's a problem with complexity one. If you have just a qualitative sense of the coordination complexity, clear in mind at this point, how many agents or stakeholders does it take to solve that problem? Then you start seeing that sometimes the degree of complexity, coordination complexity of the problem is maximum, meaning all. It takes all stakeholders to solve the problem. Once you reach that stage, you know that unless all stakeholders are participating in a coordinated coordination, etc., all the way to cooperation, the problem would not be solved. So the new problem, and I hope that now the vocabulary is clear, the new challenge is that problems have maximum degree of C complexity, if and only if, for the logicians, that there is not a typo, the double F. It means if and only if in short version, and it means necessary and sufficient in other context. They have maximum degree of C complexity if and only if they are unsolvable without the mobilization of all relevant networks or communities. In other words, if the problem is climate change, it takes everybody to make a difference. And if someone is not on board, problem not solved. If only 3 people plus 1 driving are there, the car does not start, no matter how goodwill the 4 are. So for coordination complexity to work, of course, you need some communication. Communication in the strict sort of Shannon sense of signaling to each other. Back to the car, you need to be able to shout like 1, 2, 3, go, or signal to the driver that it's time to change gear, etc. It's a plausible requirement that the harder the problem, the more agents may be required to solve. I don't have a mathematical proof for that, but it makes sense. It's more like, if the problem is really hard to solve, it makes sense to think that you need more and more agents. Now, mind that this is just a hypothesis, because in fact, you could actually talk in terms of different agents required. Imagine, for example, lifting something. If something is very heavy, it makes sense to talk about more and more agents giving a hand, or maybe someone with a good technology to lift it, or someone really very strong, 2 strong people or 4 weak people. So this is just with several conditions around. I think it makes sense. No, even the same agents and same conditions, it makes sense to think that the harder the problem gets, the more agents need to be involved. I stress all agents, biological and artificial. Remember the agency of the other day? That agency needs to be in place if you want to solve problems that require maximum degree of coordination. It is disheartening to think that we have the agency, we have the clear sense of what needs to be done, and we don't put the agency at work to solve that problem. Remember what we discussed the other day in terms of how we're using AI, or especially machine learning, to do anything almost but solve social and environmental problems. And the last hypothesis, problems with high CC require human-machine communication coordination. We live in a world where that complexity has surpassed human abilities on. We won't make it without having this human-machine communication and coordination in place. It's quite obvious. No, climate change is so present in our minds that I don't think I need to stress that too much. Okay, so far so good. These are just a bit of concept mapping, a bit of conceptual design. We understand a little bit better what complexity is, that there's another kind, maybe non-reducible, maybe to the four kinds I've introduced. This coordination complexity, how many agents does it take to solve the problem? What kind of conditions are required for the coordination of those agents to take place? Communication certainly, etc., etc. What's the paradox? Well, the more complex, and now we know that it's one of the five, possibly all of them, sense of complexity that we are using, is not difficult. Let me add a footnote to this. When you hear people, especially some philosophers, or people, I would rather say, who teach philosophy is a big name, talk about complexity, what they really mean is difficult. What's the difference between difficult, in this case, don't forget about the complex, difficult, simple, skills, etc., but just difficult as in a problem is difficult to solve. But if a problem is difficult to solve, it's your fault. You just don't get it. When you little kids like, oh my goodness, this mathematical is really difficult. I don't know how to do it. The responsibility for the difficulty, which is a knowledge in the thing, is the agent. If you call it complex, all of a sudden it is his fault. Well, it's complex. The fact that I don't get it, well, it's because it's complex. So anyone who tells you, oh, the political situation these days is very complex, sounds like having said something, he didn't say anything. And if you meant difficult, well, you should say difficult to understand. And therefore maybe step out and find someone who actually does understand it. So beware, people talk about complexity, normally they mean difficult, and normally they're shifting the burden of why there is so from the thing to themselves or backwards. Describing something as difficult is blaming yourself for not getting it. Describing something as complex is blaming the thing as something that you don't get it. It is his fault. And a question that is very complex may justify why I don't understand it. And a question that is very difficult just shows that I don't have enough maths. Because for anyone else, that's a piece of cake. But back to us. More complexity in the world, more cooperation is required. It seems quite straightforward. More agents, more communication in terms of signal exchange, etc. But in this context, we have a paradox, and this is something a bit disturbing. And it's going to take a minute or two to get it. I leave the description there in as many words. I'm going to try to make this clear, and if I fail, it's my fault. So just raise your hand and I'll do it again, because this is the essence of this lecture. If we don't get it right, there is no point of what we did before and what we're going to do afterwards. So imagine an oversimplified history of man. and we move from hunting and gathering fruit and stuff, pre-urban, prehistorical stage, cities, Egyptian, Athens, Roman Empire, whatever, and you get all the way here. Meanwhile, there've been fundamental empires everywhere else, not just the Romans. I'm from Rome, so that's the one I know. But of course, the world is a big place. As this society become more and more affluent, richer, the individuals within those societies, they feel less need to coordinate with their neighbor. In a very primordial, primitive, elementary society, you need to get together, at least to defend yourselves from the animals or other people. You need to get together to build the walls of the city. You need to get together because there are no machines. So all those fields, it takes people and animals to be fruitful and so on. As you become richer, and of course, for example, there is a division of labor that grows and grows and grows, we become more and more like units, independent. I don't need to know how to make bread. All I need is money to buy, and someone somewhere is making. I don't even know where it comes from, and so individuals feel that they need to coordinate their efforts. It's not there. I mean, essentially, I don't even know who my neighbor is, and that's okay. I mean, I'm not saying this in a sort of negative sense. As long as we just don't step on each other's toes. It could be nobody, it could be replaced tomorrow. I'm a single unit. Now, modernity, remember, is the age of the eye of the individual, of the subject, who is increasingly not in need of any other subject to have a proper life. Of course, he needs other subjects to do whatever they do, but he doesn't need to do it with them. He doesn't need to get together. So the sense of community, for example, or polis, to have the Greek word, the community, the church in a religious Christian context, as we are here in Bologna, starts becoming nice to have, a better than nothing. I like it. It becomes an option. I join that community or another. I don't have to join the small village because I have no transport, no electricity, no sort of technology of any kind. And unless there's one guy that comes every now and then, say, with a message for another village, I have no idea what's happening in the rest of the universe. Well, there, I better not get along with anyone else, or if my house catches fire and it's just on me, I'm not going to be able to solve it. However, so more and more wealth, more and more affluent, we live better, we are more independent, division of labor, consumerism, capitalism, you know the story. As that grows, more and more individualism, which, okay, so far so good. But more and more individualism goes together with less need to do things together. With the nature of the problems faced by a society that becomes more and more complex. As a society becomes more complex, the problems faced by that society require more and more the 3C. And that is where things misalign and we are in deep trouble. So we have one line, which is society becomes more complex, richer, more affluent. Second line, people become more individualistic. They mind their own business. They don't need to get together. Meanwhile, the problems faced by an affluent society, more technology, more globalization, more communications, the ability to travel from here to there in no time, etc., etc. Well, that world requires more and more in terms of what problems is facing, the coordination, the 3C, the collaboration, cooperation, that actually the individuals think they don't need anymore because they live in an affluent society. The outcome of this is either the individualistic denial that those problems either exist or can be solved, They exist, but I don't care, or they just don't exist. It's not happening. Why? Because I live in an affluent society, I'm an individual, that is not affecting me. Anything else is just not within the scope of my interest, analysis, values, etc. Or, be careful, the individualism in the middle, which is getting less and less interest, attracted, is less and less under pressure to coordinate, collaborate, cooperate with others. Well, either as a denial or cynical attitude. Yeah, they're there, can't do anything, who cares, goodbye. Or you get another problem, which I highlighted the other day, which is we don't need to change. We can do through individualism what is required to solve problems that actually are complex in the coordination sense. That is the good people mistake. And that goody-goody attitude, that is as bad as the denial that we have a problem. The individual that tells you all it takes is for you to take a shorter shower did not get the point. Not because taking a shorter shower is not good in itself. It is, but it's good for other reasons. It's useless if we don't agree everybody to take shorter showers all at once. So remember, the individual tells you, yes, we have a problem. The car is not starting. Unfortunately, we need to push. And it tells you, your single individual effort is all it takes. Go, push, and come home and sleep soundly. It's an idiot. We're not going to survive on this planet with that individualism still there thinking, I don't have to compromise. I don't have to get with someone else and say, okay, because being together means giving in a little bit of this or a little of that. Okay, we need to do this together at the same time. Now, there are two objections here. One already addressed, the other one is coming. Two, individualism doesn't make it. One is, but it is a value in itself. It is good to take a shorter shower. It is good not to take public transports, etc. It is. I say this once more, and then we stop there. But not for the utilitarian view behind it. It's good not because it is useful. It's good because there are other reasons why it's good. For example, a Kantian perspective whereby you do what is expected from a rational agent, or you do because that is the way in which you respect yourself. You look at yourself and say, I'm the kind of person who cares. And I don't care if nobody else doesn't care. And I don't care if it makes zero difference. I would do it anyway. I'm the last person on this island. And I will still not, say, kick the butt of a dog because that's not nice. But nobody's watching. It doesn't make any difference. I know, but then I'm not that person. So there are many different reasons for not taking a long shower. That being useful? No, unless you have the second objection, which is the universalizable nature of their action, which is, but what if everybody were to do the same? Yeah, well, that would make a difference. The universalizability of the good action is a typical Kantian sort of perspective, as you remember. Act as if you were a universal legislator, as if your action could be, as you were, recommended to anyone in those circumstances, to anyone. You walk into this room and say, look, anyone should do this, for example. There's a piece of rubbish somewhere, you pick it up and put it away. So, well, I clean up something. Universalizable, absolutely. Anyone walking in this room should do the same. So that universalizability is an objection against the argument that says individualism is not good enough. Because it says, well, but if all individuals do it, it's 7 billion people start taking showers, don't meet, they don't take cars, blah, 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 blah. It will make a difference. The conclusion of the argument is correct. It will make a difference. Is the reasoning that doesn't? Why would they? Because it is useful in terms of my action, or now are we shifting? No, it is useful because it's universalized, because everybody does it. But that's not part of the individualism. So what is happening here is that you are selling under the objection already a shift, which is everybody does it. Oh, but that is called coordination or collaboration or cooperation. So if there is a message in this room that says, please, 1, 2, 3, stand up. But that is not just, say, 15 individuals individually deciding, etc., etc. It's more like an effort as a group. We all stand up. So let me repeat this reasoning in case from some of the faces wasn't super transparent. Individualism doesn't make it because it does not achieve the level of coordination that is required to tackle problems that takes more than one to solve it. Competition will also not make it, market, etc., because competition can at best leverage some kind of coordination, but it will not reach the level of, maybe this helps from, it will be here at the level of coordination, but it will not reach the level of collaboration and cooperation. Remember people on the street, on the road, everybody going their own way, they don't care, as long as they don't bump into each other. That's what we mean by coordination here. We're not assuming the rich concept which includes everything else. So individualism doesn't make it. It doesn't tackle the big problems. It can only reach a certain amount of success. Objection number one. But an individual good action remains a good action. Yes, it does, but not because it's useful. For other reasons. Because in itself, it is useless. It doesn't pass the threshold. Remember, one pushing the car. Doesn't make it. Other objection. Oh, but what if it becomes universal? Well, then it will make a difference. Aha, so it is okay. No, it isn't, because in order to become universal, you need more than just competitive coordination among individuals, self-interest agents. You need collaboration and cooperation. So essentially, you are conceding the argument. You're just saying it would be if you were more than just individuals. In other words, if you were a matter of collaboration or cooperation among clearly 7 or 8 billion individuals all going in the same direction. But individualism in and of itself, the one that we have inherited from modernity, the I, the cogito, the competitive environment, the market only, that is only successful up to a certain point. Note on a side, it is successful. The point is not enough. So it's not an objection in terms of, oh, it doesn't work. No, it does. It doesn't work well enough to make it all the way to what we need to achieve. Markets, for example, and some competitive coordination between agents, for example, thanks to the antitrust, so you don't have monopolies, and so they compete with each other, we are better off. Well, that works. No, prices go down, you get better services, lower cost. If that mechanism is in place, it's a good mechanism. Does it mean, for example, that a market that has high competition, lower cost, better services and products, better goods for customers, going to solve the climate change? No. Why? Because that will probably be at the cost of societal and environmental damages. Oh, but I thought, no, lower cost for my aftershave was a great thing. Well, absolutely. That less expensive, whatever gadget you buy, unless we have taken into account, but how do we take into account the environmental and societal cost? Well, by having a little bit more than just a competitive, market-oriented, individualist, etc. setting. To do that, you need more collaboration and more cooperation. To do that, we need to bypass or solve somehow the paradox that I told you here. This paradox is with us as we speak. And as we speak, we are essentially determining the end of human life on this planet, which seems to be big enough as a problem to be worried about. But I don't see people so screaming. Instead, we're probably worried, as we know in these lectures, about AI being the existential risk, which of course is a joke. So what can we do here to make a difference, given conceptual design, understanding what's going on, the problem of this paradox? If good locally is not good enough globally, if good locally meaning, for example, that in my family we recycle, we take shorter showers, we don't eat meat, etc., etc. Not true. But we like to. We do eat meat. I confess. I can improve. My name is Luciano, and I eat meat. Governance is the solution, not the market. I'll remind you, the market is a fantastic thing. It's a great engine to create wealth. It's the worst tool to create wealth and do that while improving the environment and making society better. Of these three variables, only one is covered by the markets, and the individualism, the competitive, the modernity that we have built behind it. Creation of wealth, we don't know a better engine. And anyone who thinks that there is a different engine, well, the burden is on their shoulders. All the experiments we have had in recent history have been disastrous. What's happened next door in Russia? So, generation of wealth, market, individualism, competition, by all means. What other tools do we need to solve the problem? Governance is the thing. This is a bit of a mouthful, so we can go through this a bit more slowly, almost there. So some of the current problems in many ecosystems, of course, planetary as well, are part of a failure, so it's not working, in the governance of the coordination complexity of our information societies. By now, their sentence should be transparent. I'm just looking at the people in the room. I can't see the people online, and some of them don't seem to be perceiving it as transparent at all. I'll stop for a moment. Oh, no, go ahead. It's obvious. Yeah? Click. Give me a signal because, yeah? Okay, good. So these are not just management problems, but first of all, a matter of governance. So governance here is what do we do and how we do it so that things go in the way we want them to go. So if we have a lot of problems around us, and certainly the ethics of AI is one of them, or if you like, all the digital ethics problem, the revolution caused by the digital, etc., but also we mentioned all the social and the environmental problems. And social includes the war in Ukraine, so any kind of social as in humans versus humans sometimes. But a lot of those problems are a matter of getting together properly, coordination complexity, and therefore exercising the right governance that makes that happen or facilitates that, as opposed to relying on tools that are not delivering. And if we keep using tools that cannot, by design, by what they are, cannot deliver, those problems are going to stay there and become increasingly more difficult to solve. So this is not a problem of management or say economic solution, etc. Is a problem of governance. The governance here is to be, and you can see why this is a link to the lectures for next year on the politics of information, is design, management, and care. So how you put together design, how you handle the management, and how you make sure that they work properly, all the strategies that facilitates the growth and well-being of society with a high degree of coordination complexity. As simple as that. Once you get all this in place, I mean, these words should be all that there's nothing mysterious about this. Now, this leads us back to the point we made the other day. The challenge is not the innovation, is the governance of the digital. But now this governance of digital has a much deeper sense than just, of what do we do with the digital revolution. It's a matter of tackling something that otherwise, as a paradox, will be the end of us on this planet. With migrations we have never seen before, from countries that will be scorched. I mean, the last reports, for example, about England, and that might surprise people who don't live there, or even people who live there actually, is that there's not enough water in England anymore. I know that the weather doesn't look like, but it's always grey, but it doesn't rain. In fact, if you ask anyone, how many cities in Australia get more rain every year than London? Which city do you think gets more rain in Australia? In Australia, it's pretty dry. Is there any city in all of them? All of them get more rain than London. There is not enough water in England, and there hasn't been for a long time. And yet we waste water like there's no tomorrow. The grass has to be green. Going running last week, and all my neighbors everywhere. And trust me, that is not really strictly necessary. Mine is a bit yellow, and that's okay. Now, not to be the goody-goody in the group, but surely I can't see drinkable water used for greening the grass. But that's the perception. That's the lack of coordination, and therefore, in a community that, if information were provided and if governance were in place, the solution probably would be adopted. And we're talking about a civilized country where normally Brexit is an exception. If you have a problem, you know what the solution is, pragmatic. So back to us, governance here means much more than just handling this digital revolution and thinking, oh, what do we do that? Because the agency that we're discussing in these lectures is one of the most extraordinary technological evolutions and innovation we ever had, ever. And it is one of the most extraordinary reservoir of problem solving and task taking that we have ever seen. So throwing at that, and as they say, the chicken sink to these problems through governance would be an ABC sort of policy for any government or any sort of enlightened politicians that we need so desperately. So the governance issue is the problem. It requires a lot of thoughtfulness, so more of the kind of work that we're doing in these lectures, not just this, of course, and some projectuality. I check this. It is an English word. It's not very used. It's a bit common in other languages, certainly in English, but means having a mind such that you think in terms of the future as a project, not just as something that happens. And if I have enough competition, coordination at their level between different units, something will emerge that is good for everybody. The invisible hand of the market, I remind you, there's only one thing. It increases wealth. It does not take care of the environment or society. For their hand, those two things don't exist. And so you can't blame the invisible hand for not tackling or handling problems that are not for it. So how do we do this in terms of moving forward? And this is the link to the job problem that we saw yesterday. Of course, this opens up a real series of lectures, which I hope to give next year, in terms of, okay, well, thank you so much for governance, what it is, how we do it, digital sovereignty, who controls what kind of policy are we talking about? Oh, that not for today. I told you this today was just about complexity and a little hook for a whole sort of a line of development, which we will deal with next year, hopefully. But I want to say a few more words about the job market that we discussed yesterday. Remember, AI is, you're ruining my life, picture of AI, and in terms of stealing my jobs. Well, we don't have another color here that is not trivial. If you remember the brown, working in agriculture, the blue, industry, the white, services, it's natural to use green, obviously. I mean, that's take a genius to think in terms of the jobs of the future as green collars. A lot of the jobs already in this room, probably, if you have a job, are probably already greenish, as in not so much handling information, but taking care, managing, having a sense of what needs to be done before or after, so priority setting. And that goes from the little example I gave you before, me walking here, finding something on the floor and putting it in the dustbin, and that is a green collar moment, all the way to the Prime Minister, who needs to be a green collar, taking care of our whole government and our whole nation, potentially in line with or cooperating with, collaborating with the rest of Europe, etc., etc. So from the very powerful to the less powerful, taking care, in a sense, to be discussed next year, is probably what we're going to see as the next wave. And taking care has one good value that the other three colors don't. It's balance. Whereas in terms of agriculture, industry, or how many pieces of paper you can shuffle around, and bureaucracy can probably digest and destroy hours of work, no matter how much that is in place. The amount of world and events, processes, things, potential projects one can take care of is endless. So if I were in a sort of Asimov attitude, since I hope you have been watching it, but if you haven't, so strongly recommend it. Foundation. Of course, the book is much better, as they always say, but in this case, it is true. It's much better. But if you are in a moment of a foundation moment, Asimov style, and we want to look at the far distant future, then it is a future for green collars. It is a future of people who will have the skills, sometimes elementary, sometimes highly sophisticated. It's not a skill-related job. I said, I can collect that piece of paper and put it in the dustbin, and that is a green collar job. Can take care of the world. Potentially in line with a governance that makes sense of the complexity, etc., all we said before. So all this represents both an opportunity, solving the paradox, having the proper governance, green collars, the education towards a green collars sort of scenario is a great opportunity. It's a necessity because if we don't do it, the world is not going to end well. History is there ready to teach us very tragic lessons. It's also a responsibility, morally speaking, to design all these complex systems in a way that have the complexity, the governance, the green collars, except all the other items that we discussed in these lectures in the right place. That also clarifies why at the beginning of the lectures, weeks ago, I hope you still remember, I said, look, the digital revolution is not a revolution in terms of communication. It's a revolution in terms of environmental forces. I told you in the past, reminder, it's not about live TV or radio or the telephone revolution, whether we can exchange messages. It was understood that way in the 90s. But the internet was around finally as something that was getting commercialized, where markets started getting interest, the web and so on. Internet, by the American legislation, in particular, the Clinton administration saw it as another mass media, another means of communication that, like the telephone, should be left alone, make it grow, and then we will regulate. That's how you do it, with a utility. But internet, the digital revolution of large, is not the emergence of a utility, it's the emergence of a new environment in which we spend our lives. Remember, we are within the dishwasher. Remember, grandma, the daughter, and the granddaughter walking back into the computer. You notice that you are inside when it stops working. If you don't have, for example, any signals, what happened? Well, welcome to the life outside the dishwasher. I hope the analogy here is clear, especially for those of you who are not here understanding. So it is an environmental revolution, and something that I had the opportunity to explain to a few powerful politicians every now and then, especially in the previous government when they were listening. So different people were able to make different decisions, especially when I was especially Colau for the Italians here. He knew, he knows, and the enlightened people know that when you talk about the digital, therefore, because of all the things we said so far, it's not a cherry on top. It's not something you add on. You're thinking, okay, well, you know, there are so many things, environmental change, and social difficulty, the war in Ukraine. Oh, yeah, of course, also the digital revolutions. It's the underlying change that could make a difference to all those other changes. That's why, you know, the analogy here is not a cherry, but a cake. You miss the cake. You miss the historical opportunity to actually send things in the right direction. This is, shall we say, frustrating, disheartening. The fact that someone might think, oh, look, all the problems we have, well, let's postpone this digital stuff because not now, now is not the time, etc. It's like saying, look, we have a potential venue to approach all these problems. Well, let's ignore it because you need to have a pragmatic attitude. There are pressing issues. Dear Professor Floridi, let's not talk about philosophy and all these ethics and the digital. We have a war in Ukraine. I know, obviously, but if you want to tackle all this from a sufficiently robust perspective, of course you need to bring peace to Ukraine. But you will not solve the next crisis and the next, unless you have a different way of approaching modernity, the 21st century. What's the project here? Because if we move from one crisis to the next without stepping back and thinking, look, something really needs to be readdressed, and we have a way of taking this in a different direction, we're just going to bump into another war next round, which will not be in Ukraine, but maybe Taiwan. So at the moment, this is just something what we said before, cooking metaphor, etc. We really don't have a robust mechanism to foster the cooperation, coordination, etc., independent of self-interest, and as market-based thinking, game theory. The first half of the book, the competitive games, the sum zero sort of games, prisoner's dilemma kind of style, etc. What we need to develop is exactly those mechanisms. So a whole debate in terms of what would it take to incentivize more cooperation and collaboration, financially, for example. If people don't get together because they are, say, self-interest, what would it take to overcome that self-interest? There's a whole lecture here about tolerant paternalism for today, for this course. So it's just an appetizer. However, if you want, there's a paper there. So tolerant paternalism, and that is part of the argument there. We need more leadership, of course. That is part of the issue here. And as I told you, we come to the end of the lecture. Governance is not management of how things are going now, but a vision of where you want to be. The leadership here has, I wish I had put that, sorry, let me just see if I, no. So I wish I had put there one of the slides that are in the Politics of Information course. When Plato has to describe the politician, the people who take decisions in the city, he has this analogy that will be forever in political thinking. It will be used, reused 1,000,000 times, which is the Kubernetes. Cybernetics comes from there. The Kubernetes is the pilot of the ship. And the pilot knows how to navigate, knows the ship very well, inside out, knows the winds, the currents, and has a project, knows where they want to go. So a project, technical competence, proficiency, and a serious high-level ability to manage everything, so that if you have to go left and right and a little bit backwards, anyway, you know at the end where is the goal. Now, that analogy, the political, we are all on the same boat, etc., that all come from Plato, all that. And there we have a really good description, and it will be the description that we will inherit for the rest of our sort of history of political thinking of leadership and good governance. Leadership is exactly this, the ability of making sure that all the interests are aligned behind the goal that you want to achieve. It's the opposite of populism. A populist, like any influencer, doesn't make sure that the interest get designed and coordinated so that something is achieved, but looks at where the interests are going and decides that is where we are going. So instead of saying, look, we need to go north and let's make sure that everything happens. So if we go north, looks around, everybody going south, south it is today. That is the populist, from Salvini to Trump, or any influencer worth their soul. I don't know what is always the soul, but worth their value. They will not go against the current, another navigational metaphor. The real leader will go against the current in order to achieve something that is not good for the whole community. The community that has, as a community, leadership, as a community, will go against what is the solution, obvious, etc., blame, love the neighbor. So without leadership, you go where the wind takes you. Now, and there's a really bad book in Italian that has almost that as a title. I won't mention it, but unless you have seen it, go where whatever takes you. And the influencer, of course, will simply follow whatever the mass will be able to afford. At this point, a big step back. If you remember, we covered this at the beginning of the ethics of AI, the lecture, but also discussing political ethics, what it is, what it isn't. We're back to a value-oriented sense of politics or governance. So what kind of project do we need to have in order that the project informs the governance and the leadership, which leads to tackling these global problems at a level of complexity, initial complexity, that make sure that it's not just a bunch of individuals all doing whatever they wish, but we all come together and crack the problem. Well, the values behind are the values that we have also discussed, of course. So it's not just about good and evil, do's and don'ts, okay, it's not, because that's the standard ethical way of doing the hard ethics. Remember, hard ethics is the compliance first, what else can be done over and above. But it's also the soft ethics of the intangibles. In this case, I was talking, a reminder of the previous slides, of the what's right and wrong with a company according to customers, as an example. I mention this because the kind of governance that we need to talk, again, next course, etc., will have to deal with, remember, that tool that doesn't work well enough, but works, which is the market. The market is not something that will tell us what we need to do, but it's the tool that we will use, or we need to use, in order to make sure that among all the tools we have, the market is also working in favor of the project, the leadership, etc. To do that, you need the soft values to make sure, for example, the companies do the right thing. Boiling this down to the most trivial element here, and almost there for Q&A, for example, tax incentives so that they become green. Oh, is that all this blah, blah, blah to come up with tax incentives to become green? Now, this is sort of trivializing the whole sort of analysis, but it's also about that. It's about what kind of governance you can do and implement so that these problems become tackable or treatable at a level of complexity that otherwise the individual could never hope to discuss. So because I put this 3C at the beginning, the coordination complexity, I thought that 3C could not actually finish this lecture properly. So we need to understand much better, but comprehend was too tempting as a C. Understanding is a better word, but comprehend is a bit unusual in English, but as a C, we need to understand. This is something I will always bang on inevitably, because there is, even when you finally convince people that we have a lot of problems, the immediate reaction is, let's solve the problem right now. You're right, yet this is pressing. And then you need to convince them of the second point, which is we need not only to understand the problems, but take the time to understand what the solutions are. You cannot rush, although the pressure is there. We need to create or design much better, and we need to control. Control is the ABC of politics, is what sovereignty is about, is a form of power. The other forms of power is create something or influence something's behavior or control the behavior. You create out of thin air, you create a stone, you transform that stone into a bird, and you control the flight of the bird. So create, transform, control. This is power. Power is always exercising 1, 2, 3, or combination of the three. But in this case, because we're talking politics, we're talking about control of behavior. And that's what we need to do much, much better than we have done so far. So back to, again, what philosophers should be thinking about this. How much we understand what's going on, how much we can actually design solutions for what's going on, and how much good policies we can put in place in terms, for example, little sort of appetizer, not for this lecture, how much we could build a society on tolerance rather than justice. But I said these all sort of little hints for something that we will not cover, because we will cover tomorrow, it's Thursday, and it's the last lecture, yes. I wanted to finish with at least a sense of where all this goes, and therefore the project, remember, all the blah, blah, blah so far leads to, okay, so what is the human project for the 21st century? What do we want to do? Because then you have the leadership, the governance, the law, all the cascade of effects. We need to think. And the thinking about the human project of the 21st century is facilitated by looking at, ideally, what we would like. And that's the digital utopia we're going to discuss tomorrow. So tomorrow will be about what would be the world we would like to live in. Because if we had a utopia there, then we could know what we need to approximate in terms of governance and leadership. So we would know how to handle the complexity of the problems, and all the way back to what we do when we want to regulate, etc. I'll stop here. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A. Thank you. Setting it. I can't hear you, sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, the chat. So let me chat. Just a moment. Chat. Here we go. That one. Oh, there's more. Sorry. How many more about? One more. Oh, keep going. Oh my. Okay. Over here. Oh, this from yesterday. So we start from the one from yesterday? Okay, fair enough. So reading this aloud, given what the AI is or could be, the successful divorce between agent and intelligence and the necessity to envelope, can be said that the AI agents might soon play a major role in re-ontologizing part of the reality around us. First of all, congratulations for the question, because it wasn't easy to handle all those terms properly. So well done. Let's stop here. So the straightforward answer is no. But the reason behind. There is a sense in which, yes, the more agents you have in an environment that is being shaped around those agents, the more the nature of that environment changes also according to those agents. So why the answer is not yes? Well, because the conceptualization of all this happens on this side of the divide. It's us who conceptualize the world in one way or another. So if you like, to be not necessarily on the one hand, on the other hand, but one could say that from a ontological perspective, no, the nature of what we're discussing, remember, we're always approaching that from a level of abstraction. But to simplify, for once, let's talk about the world as if we had access to the world independently of any level of abstraction. Yes, of course, the more agency and variety of agents and enveloping around those agents takes place, the more we have here a re-ontologization of the world. Essentially, you are changing the nature of the thing. But the point is that because this happens at a level of from the epistemological understanding of human agents or what's going on, is on this side that the re-ontologization happens or does not happen. If it happens, it will be because we have done all this to the environment, but it would not be done by them in the sense of this is the source of how we understand the world differently. Let me put it differently. If the world changes, one could say, oh, that's why we understand the world differently. Yes, but who is doing the different thinking about the world? It's us. However, what made us think differently about the world is, of course, the world changing. So that's why I would say no, epistemologically, yes, ontologically, depending on whether you want to stress how the world is changing. So yes, the re-ontologization is happening, or you want to stress the fact that all this anyway ultimately happens within a perspective that is entirely epistemological. So it's us reinterpreting the world according to. I hope this helps. The next bit, would that imply that AI should be allowed to make its own decisions while remaining within the framework of established societal norms and values? Not really. Now, this starts not shifting into sci-fi. As I said, start shifting is not. Of course, we can, as we speak, we have drones, for example, that could be 100% autonomous. 100%. They could just be unleashed and identify target, shoot on target, 100%. No science fiction. Just build them. So if that is what we mean, it's already happened. But if what it means here is that that should be okay, we should not, as it were, enable it. Also not. I'm not sure whether the YouTube video is still there, so forgive me. But at some point, Samsung, so it's on YouTube, so nothing, no secret. Samsung was asked by the South Korean army to provide a defense system to be deployed at the border with North Korea. The first implementation of that system, we're talking probably more than 10 years ago. It's a long, long time ago. I've forgotten when I saw this. The first implementation of that system was 100% autonomous. It was on shooting cannons that would identify target and shoot on target. No man or woman, human being on the loop, after the loop, to be seen. It was the army that said, maybe not. That's not a good idea. I mean, that border is very porous. It's also visited by people like that. So, doable, yes. Allowed, ethically, it will be the same. What would be the consequences? What would the consequences be with regard to the human agent autonomy in terms of digital governance? Well, as I said, the digital autonomy or the autonomy of the that we have is a completely different kind with respect to the kind of autonomy that we can talk about when we talk about artificial agents. So in that case, we take autonomy as the ability to self-regulate itself on the basis of input from the world that has been achieved by interacting with the world. So the system makes a difference. The difference is sort of perceived. That perception gets as an input. I am the system. I have sufficient sort of self-regulatory autonomy to change my behavior. So my thermostat is autonomous in that sense. It changes the temperature of the house autonomously by simply receiving the input, knowing that I'm coming back, blah, blah, blah. But that sense of self-regulation is very limited. It doesn't have the sense of, for example, a project, interest or a project or a goal-directed hope that something may happen. Normally, we describe that more inclusively, talking about not just autonomy, but freedom, which is way more than just self-regulation. So I would say that no, things would and should stay that way, so to speak. What time is the class on Thursday? 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Yeah, okay, good. Done. All done. Okay, so yeah, there it is. Thank you. Okay, so is there space to auditing the auditing methodologies? Because we have legislation for AI, but not yet for how to audit this legislation. Yeah, so the answer is yes. I mean, you can always do something to do there something, so we can always go meta. In fact, what we're probably going to see is that the auditing methodologies will be assessed so that they actually deliver what are expected to deliver. And if they don't, it will be abandoned and another methodology will be adopted. So trivially, yes, it's an historical process. Normally it's rather informal because these methodologies are a bit like cooking sort of recipes. Does it deliver or does it not? Is it a good recipe or is it not? And at some point you have a book where the good recipes are there. How do we get there? Well, trial and error. No. Did it get, say, the companies what the companies wanted? Was the law okay with this? Yes. We have a link. Thank you. I think we're getting here. Okay. Oh, more about the lectures online. It will take some time. I need to download them. I need to edit them because there's apparently Teams didn't know, or I didn't know, but Teams keeps recording if you don't turn it off, even if you have turned off Teams. So it just keeps going. So the first lecture apparently is 8 hours long, which would be off-putting to say the least. So give me some time, but they will be there. I will put a message both here and on the website. If you haven't seen the web page, at some point I will say there the lectures are available. They're available at this link. So at least check that, but check that in the following weeks or days. It will take some time. Information. Okay, paradox. Do individualism roots really in affluence of the society rely maybe, or are really in affluence of society, or is it caused more by the inability of the individuals everywhere to properly assess, understand the chain cause consequences for problems with high cognition complexity? Well, I think there's not an exclusive or it's an and. Yes, of course. Understanding is also lacking. I just gave the example of water in England. If you ask any average citizen, probably will tell you that there's plenty, and that's why they use it like there's not more. Factual truth? No, there isn't, and there hasn't been for a long time. We're running out, and if we keep going this way, it will be irrational. Welcome to the real world. I think I don't remember who said that, but no, you can ignore reality, but not its consequences. Yeah, so that's the point. So yes, there isn't enough probably of understanding, but the ability, the possibility of doing that is given by our society. There are societies in which you cannot afford to be an individual. Disregard whatever happens in your village, because what happens there, it's your life. So unless someone, now, for example, is able to provide sharing resources and efforts with other people, there is just not survival. So I would say, of course, more information is always a good solution, and education, etc. But I wouldn't put that as the really distinguishing point here. It's a constant in human history. let me just give you a bit of time. So this question presupposes something that I think I already told you. So forgive me if I stress that again. But we have these two sort of traditions: the Socratic and the Hobbesian. Remember? No. No. So why people don't do the right thing? Why do we make mistakes, moral mistakes? Why evil, human evil in human history? What is the cause? And you get one tradition that starts with Socrates that says, well, essentially, we humans behave in an evil way, immorally, because we don't understand what is good for us. If we knew, we wouldn't. So it's an epistemological problem. It's a problem about understanding, knowing, insight, information, education. It's about what you actually get in terms of, is it good for me or not? Now, that tradition, which is also called very, sometimes labeled intellectualistic, you can tell, stresses enormously the role of education. How do you have better citizens? That question. Education, education, education. No, only glass down. There's another tradition. Now, this one basically says we're good. As agents, we're morally good agents. We would do the right thing if only we knew. So we are good but stupid. And that's why evil happens. The other tradition is, I like to attribute that to Hobbes. This reconstruction is entirely homemade for this class. You don't find it anywhere else, so it might be controversial. But the other tradition says almost the opposite. It says, Hobbes, you remember, we are all wolves to each other, self-interest, sharp, always for the target. We will achieve what we want, and if you unleash human sort of desires and interest, it would be a disaster. That's why there's a law to constrain and regulate selfish interest agents. What emerges from there is intelligent, just evil. So you get this picture. Socrates, good but stupid. The other picture, bad but intelligent. And the solution for one is education, for the other one is law. And if you want to be fancy, you use the Greek words and you go paideia and nomos. And if you want even fancier and even pious, you tell that civilization develops in terms of paideia and nomos. Bingo, easy, so the dialectic between paideia and nomos that has determined Western civilizations in terms of Socratic and Hobbesian values, blah, 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 that's what it means. It means that the two anthropologists behind almost every ethical thinking are assuming that either we are good, but we don't get it, or we're evil, nasty beast, but we know what we want. We achieve it like the wolf, kills the prey. Well, obviously we are neither. Obviously, each of us has days that when we are Socratic, days we are Hobbesian. When it comes to chocolate, I'm terribly Socratic. When it comes to parking, I'm the Hobbesian agent. I know what I want, and I don't care, and I get it. And if I get it, you don't get it, and trust me. So, from chocolate to parking, Socrates holds more. It is true that every decent society develops in terms of more education, more regulation, nomos paideia, interaction. So the answer is that yes, of course, but it has been since we started this discussion with Socrates, at least. Thanks for the tolerant paternalism article. Yes, so that is one of the questions I would like to tackle. How? No, so shall we do this one online first, and then? So the question is how to apply correctly game theory to new AI governance models. I would love to see that done as a research. And above all, I would love to see that. I don't know. So that is another question. And it's one of the questions that I hope we will tackle at Yale. We just hired someone who is actually a bit of an expert in game theory, also because of this. But what I would like to see is not just how to apply, game theory to this governance model from a competitive perspective, because that has been done a million times. I would like to see whether we can do that from a cooperation game theory. That would really be interesting. There is literature already there. If you haven't come across, it's a super classic, like unbelievably classic tragedy of the commons. If you haven't heard of this afternoon is a short article. You don't want to not end your life without having read that piece. But also literature on commons, for example, and how commons are managed. Can't remember the Nobel laureate, is a she, famous, we'll come back, on how commons, meaning what we share, for example, as a village, that is for anyone to use. It could be a place where you take your cows, or like a water source, etc. Well, how that can be managed as a shared resource is in the direction of this question. And I'm afraid I don't have the answer. So we reach certainly the limits of my knowledge, but that is exactly one of the things that I believe we should be studying next. Okay, we got the time. It is 3 o'clock. And question in the room.
Thank you. So we discussed about market being like a really powerful force and how we hope to leverage it for the good of the world rather than just self-serving. And of course, you can do it with incentives, taxation, and things like that. And I was wondering, and this might be naive, I'm not an expert, but if you think there is hope to tackle at lower levels, so basically to transform our economy in such a way that the wealth of a person is a better measure of the good that they've done to the world, rather than just how good they are at making money, which is more what we have now, I believe. So rather earning money rather than making money. And perhaps technology can help making much better measurement in that sense.
So the answer is yes. And there are many models. Models are developed to make sure that the sort of capitalism that we have is not the consumeristic money that gets more money, and competition is always rewarded, even if destroys the other competitor or the environment or society. But they are more based on, say, a sense of both cooperation on agents, but also in terms of impact of the companies that are developed. I don't have the slide here, but you find it easily. These are not just NGOs. No, I'm not talking about them. Are for-profit kind of ways of creating companies that have, as part of their legal status, a mission to be of benefits to the extent also circumstances. It could be others, stakeholders. It could be, for example, a urban environment. It could be a industrial sector. It could be another kind of society. So I'm afraid I don't have the slide here, so I don't want to say silly things here. I don't remember the acronyms, but there are many. One interesting thing is that this particular way of creating a legal entity is very popular in Italy. And it's one of the few countries where this is very popular. It's popular also in the United States, but not at the federal level, but at the state level in some states in the United States. But at the national level, Italy is one of the few countries where this kind of legal entity, which is a business entity, is recognized, acknowledged. If I find the actual reference, I'll tell you tomorrow, because this is an interesting question. So the point becomes, can we facilitate this? Can we incentivize this, not game theoretically, so to speak? So that either because people want to do the right thing or because they have an interest, which is fine too, to do the right thing, this becomes more than just a marginal phenomenon and becomes the norm. So that a for-profit kind of company is a company that you expect to be good for the environment, good for society, and good for business. But the point that I would like to leave behind is these three things are completely compatible. You find people that think that one has to give. No. So three things, money, society, environment, they can all be served well by business. We need to find the right design. And we don't have it at the moment because we ignore two to concentrate on one. Not time to change pace. It was okay when the world was a boundless sort of, space of resources, and if you went to pollute a river, there was another one next and another, and so on. And there were more animals to kill than you could possibly count. But once that is over, surely we shouldn't have done it. Of course, we did. We're stupid enough, Socratically speaking. But now we should at least be intelligent, educated Socratically, or smart, for business sense, to change chapter. But I'll tell you more if I remember tomorrow, because there is definitely a whole movement, and it's not just circular economy, it's not just that, but in terms of different forms of capitalism, and therefore different ways of having legal entities in a society that push exactly in that direction. So an enlightened government would be banking everything and its shirt on that, but of course, not happening. Not yet, not after this next. I mean, now that we are all here, we all know, this group will change the world, at least intellectually.
Just a question. Hope I didn't lose anything because I couldn't be here, but I was here in the infosphere, And I was wondering about this idea of cooperation, and basically, I was wondering whether what kind of objective do we need if we need an objective to foster a better cooperation and a better level, because I was for instance thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals, which we can say they are the objective the international community has posed for themselves, but they are so broad, and at the end of the day, they can be interpreted differently by different countries. So I had this doubt because I was wondering whether we should have like a more bare bones idea. So, for instance, saving our lives, or or otherwise, if it is really possible to have more complex goals and to reach a cooperation. And just let me say that as a little bit of provocation for that. Can you contextualize the examples you made in the context of the EU, as I'm studying the EU law, and that was always, and there is often talking about this idea of cooperation and coordination, and yeah.
So let me start from the last point. It actually enables me to say something nice for once about the EU. We complain a lot, especially being here about the EU. Then you wonder why everybody wants to stay here. So obviously here as in the EU, and you start thinking, well, maybe we must be doing something good. The European Union has one enormous advantage that other countries don't have, which is being as a organization, a democratic organization, which can think long term. You don't find that anywhere else in the world, either because it's not democratic, it is thinking long term, but it's called China, or because it is democratic, but it's not thinking long term, and it's called US or any other country. So the EU is the only democratic organization that has democracy on its side, so some kind of real decent accountability, and the ability to think in terms of we're going to do this in the next 5, 10, 25 years. That is something we do not appreciate enough. When we complain, and I'm coming to your question, oh, people are always short term. The business person, well, it's a term, 3 months, 4 months, whenever, and the politician, the next elections. Well, it's just for once we can say something about good stuff in terms of how long-term the EU project is. Now, speaking also of the legal aspects, it is true also, note aside for the European expert here, that Europe develops one crisis at a time. So, as we know, famously said, because the crisis put people together. When you start thinking about great moments when people actually got together, it's normally to fight other people. I mean, you don't have a Normandy landing unless there are Nazis on the other side. And shame on us, because as I remind other people constantly, you don't prevent Auschwitz, you liberate Auschwitz. And that is something that every human being in history will be guilty of. You don't prevent, you liberate Auschwitz. It could have been prevented, but we didn't. So how much foresighted humanity can be? Not much. We normally fix the problems that we saw that were coming, we suffer, and then we fix them, and then we repeat. Hopefully it won't happen this time, but there is a risk that a bit of a slap will have to happen for things to change. But back to your point, what kind of ultimate goal do we want to pursue as a society to justify all the coming together, etc.? Well, sometimes that goal is imposed by history. Nazi Europe and even reluctant US at some point had to intervene because the Japanese made it so. Some other times there is enough momentum, say post-war Europe, to know one of the worst possible, most atrocious, horrific episode in human history just happened. And so you have enough momentum to launch the European project on the basis of what just happened and say never again. Of course, 70 years later, you have to explain to people that, yes, my dad is perfectly fine, 88, totally sharp, etc., remembers American tanks in Rome. Here, in living memory. So when you start thinking about Europe, you start thinking, oh, do we really need a European Union? You must be joking. And you wish those people could be just taken and put back in time, a few years in living memory. But back to your point, that becomes really philosophical, as in big philosophical, and therefore a bit controversial. Remember, philosophy at the end is always about open problems on which we are, in principle, by default, by design, expected to disagree. Because if we were not, by design, by default, expected to disagree, it would mean that there are not open problems, meaning that we could delegate those problems to other disciplines. We are the ultimate place where all those problems are discharged, the ones that no one else can solve. So welcome to philosophy. Now, in that context, having nothing less than what is the human project, or what is the ultimate goal of human life on this planet, it takes a philosophical position. So whatever I'm going to say, and not probably a little bit tomorrow, will be personal. Or it will be the presentation of other personal approaches, but each of us should appropriate and digest and critically understand what they think is the ultimate goal of life on this planet. And of course, for some people, that leads to a religious answer. And we need to acknowledge that, whether we are or not religious, the ultimate answer is some kind of afterlife or life morally enough to guarantee, etc., etc. While the people like me, not having that particular solution available, they need to find a different kind of answer. And it needs to be a little bit more grounded in history. So more immanent, it cannot be transcendent. And immanent means something that's got to do with meaning, immanence, and how we give meaning immanently to our life on this planet historically. That leads straight to semantic capital, and we're not going to cover that. So how do we build our semantic capital through our life as individual and as a society and as a species on this planet, and what we can make of it, and why that is the ultimate value that we can sort of create, take care of, and leave to the next generation, is something that we will cover in a different context. But for anyone who's not religious, I'm not sure we have many other options than history being its own way of generating its own meaning. It goes with logic. But I think we covered enough of this. It's already 40, so unless there is a pressing question, there cannot wait, apparently. I did try, yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for the seminar. My pressing question is about today's seminar. Thinking for granted the existential risk of environmental risk and the framework adopted for the 3Cs, the coordination complexity to approach this question. My question is in two aspect question. Considering the European level of the AI Act, could that framework of the 3Cs be approachable to the AI Act on the European level? What are the pros and cons considering it? And on the global scale, we just had a pandemic. Could also that kind of approach tackle the question of the pandemics?
Yeah, we can start from the pandemic. I'm not sure this couldn't wait. The pandemic has been a good reminder that one, we need to do things together, and two, we can do them together. This was something that we used to say only a couple of years ago. Remember, when we get together, we get solutions. Humanity put together can actually crack any problem that humanity decides to solve. So there is no fatalistic or determined yourself, well, it's going to happen, we're doomed. Not at all. There's a lot of faith here in what humanity can do if it puts together if. And the if is the painful bit. So the pandemic, in this sense, philosophically speaking, was a fantastic reminder of both points. Global problem. This was a reminder in the UK. The UK decided that it was going to go its own way, independently, different from anyone. We are an island. There is a British way of approaching the pandemic. We were counting dead people to no end, as we were ignoring anything else but some kind of general solution that we would be safe from the impact. Morally problematic, to say the least, because we saw the other countries. We saw Italy and then France and Germany. And in fact, when it hit badly the UK, the number of deaths that could have been avoided is unknown. But that is what it means to be individualistic at the nation level, thinking we are different. There is a unique British way of doing it, or Italian, or French, or whatever, or Russian, you name it. There isn't. So that was a good reminder that a global problem requires a global solution. You cannot go solo, no matter who you are or where you think you're going, or you think you win. No, you and your empire. The other one is it can be done. Put together the resources, the goodwill, the determination, the political intentions behind, and you can crack the problem. So next time you have a problem like climate change, it is global and can be solved. Where is the political will and the determination to solve it? Not until we will start piling them. That is the risk. But I don't think we will avoid it. We will see, say, the Maldives disappearing completely. Then maybe someone say, wow, a nation has disappeared underwater. It takes not this much water. The Maldives are, I don't think they're much more than tens of centimeters above the level of the sea. Go 50, half a meter, whoa. Then maybe we will wake up. And I'm bringing the Maldives as an example of one of the small nations that are terrified because they don't have the resources, they don't have the voice, They don't have the ability to make a difference apart from saying, we are thinking before anyone else, and those who can make a difference are not. Could you please listen to us? Ignore it. This is a tragedy as we speak, literally. So, so this is not good news. The other not good news is the AI Act. In the past, it has changed a little bit. But when it was first formulated, not the only one, among others, I pointed out that there was nothing about the environment. It was all about risk for this, risk for that, and all the risks, all of them were all about, of course, quite rightly, humanity. Mind that individualism can be played at different levels. It can be a family that is individualistic, a country, humanity that acts as there is only me, nothing else, because I'm worthy, because I'm the only agent on this planet, whose nature, who cares? And at some point, several people, myself included, say, hello, impact on the environment, hello, and then finally there has been some modification debates about the impact of AI on the environment, but it was an afterthought. While this is happening. So I'm not too optimistic about the fact that the AI Act will actually be implemented in such a way that what we discussed today and in other contexts will be, the kind of issues that we have raised will be addressed. It's more likely to be more a matter of business and privacy, which are fundamental, but they're missing a big chunk. The big chunk matters as much. That I don't see it not being really addressed. For example, with some bit of legislation on how much this stuff consumes. Let me give you one example, and we close here. It's getting late. But we did a piece of work in collaboration with the Vodafone Institute. It's not Vodafone, but it's the institute funded by as an independent research center in Germany. And our research group, we wanted to look at the AI impact on climate change. That's years ago, which was obvious. And so with Andreas and Josh, Amy, so that you know, and the report, the long report and the short reports are both online. If you look at, say, my just for simplicity, Vodafone Institute AI Impact Climate Change, Luciano Floridi, you find it. The short version is probably the one that you want to look at. The long one is very long. But one thing that we recommended at the end of the analysis, which showed undoubtedly that the impact of digital technologies on the environment is hugely positive, with a big margin of negative impact that needs to be taken into account. So the ultimate trade-off is positive. They could save the world at a cost. The cost needs to be taken into account. It's huge and could be decreased. One way that we said, look, you could decrease this cost is by attaching, is a simple solution. Make sure that all the algorithms available, anything that is, say, uploaded on GitHub, for example, comes with how much does it cost in terms of energy consumption, like a fridge. So that I'm a company, I have two ways of doing this, and this comes with 5-star, and this comes with 3 stars. Same stuff, 5 stars, I use 5. We literally suggested a fridge level assessment in terms of stars of how much the algorithm consumes in terms of energy. It doesn't take a genius. You adopt that at the conferences, you adopt for anyone, any sort of expert and anything that needs to be uploaded, and that starts making a difference in that direction. It could have been part of the AI Act. We did this before, way before the AI Act was finalized, etc. Did you see that, Ian? I didn't. This was one of the recommendations we made to the European Commission. Nothing. Now, it's not about us, it's not about this thing, but it's just a sort of evidence of the fact that we have a way to go. And what was that, paideia almost? Sometimes you need to bang on the paideia, especially of the politicians. On that, no, we take this tomorrow. Thank you for your patience. We're way above, and I'm missing lunch as usual. Thank you.